that
Yeah.
people are too cheap. I'm like, if you can't spend $20, you don't deserve to be in the business, right? So you got to register a domain, get a branded email address, and email from that, and have a website. That's sort of like the price of entry. And we're talking about, you can do all that for under $500. You got to have someplace for people to land, to find you.
So for the audience who is listening, can you give us a brief breakdown of either how long you've been doing real estate, or how many units you have, something that kind of gives us a little bit understanding of where you're at?
Sure. So I've been doing this full time since 2011. I had been a lawyer before that here in New York City, worked on Wall Street, big Wall Street law firms, et cetera. But I left that in 2011, went out, found a partner to do real estate syndications, learned the business with her. We broke up that partnership in 2013. And I started my current business, Two Bridges Asset Management. I built a portfolio of about 400 units, which I sold in 2019. Since then, I've mostly been JVing with other people as opposed to doing it on my own. I'm partnered about 2,400 units at this point that are spread out kind of in the Sun Belt, but also out in South Dakota, where we're doing some new builds. And I've also recently got into the hospitality space. So I'm just wrapping up my first hotel renovation repositioning in upstate New York. And I'm working on another deal in New England at the moment, trying to bring that one home. It's under contract, trying to close that. So I really like the hospitality space. I'm happy to speak about that as well, if you're interested. But primarily I've been a multifamily investor up until now.
That sounds amazing. So I always like to ask my guests this question. You suddenly lose everything. What would you do?
So it's funny that you asked me this question, because my wife and I were actually talking about this the other day. And, if you're an entrepreneur, you know that there's like all kinds of ups and downs, right? Like one minute everything is great, and the next minute everything is terrible, and like you're always kind of seesawing. So I was in this moment of like, everything is going to hell. And, my wife was like, what are you worried about? Because even if what if you had to start all over again? You're not starting from zero, right? You're starting from like somewhere, much higher than that, because, you've already built a big list of investors. You know how to do these deals, you know how to put these deals together, you know how to talk to the brokers, talk to the lenders, how to pitch a deal. Like you can put these deals together, and you're not starting off like where you were 11, 12 years ago, when you had no experience and no investors, and like nobody would talk to you. So I would just go back and kind of do it all over again if I lost everything overnight. Just pick myself up off the ground, brush myself off, and just get started, but with what I know now and with who I know now.
That's amazing. So what would be the first step you would take in that process?
The first step I would take, that's a good idea, a good question. The very first thing I would do, I think, is to start emailing my email list regularly, and just kind of talk about talk about what's going on, even maybe even with me, sort of like what I'm doing. I'm restarting, bring them along the journey with me. But the important thing is to kind of like be building that rapport with your investors, like treating them like you would treat like friends, or family that you're kind of keeping up to date, because you build that personal connection, so that while you're getting that list warm, and then you're out there looking for deals, it's like a lot easier to pitch the deal to somebody when you've had this ongoing connection with them, as opposed to like, oh, hey, you haven't heard from me for a year, and now I have a deal. What do you think? There'll be some people who would be interested, but it's a lot harder to get somebody interested in a deal when like you've disappeared on them and now suddenly you're back. So I think the most important thing would be to start making connections with my investor list, and even with the people who had already invested with me, pick up the phone and call them up and just say, hey, what's going on? This is what's going on with me. I'm looking for deals. And for the people who hadn't invested yet, who were just on the list, be sort of emailing them and telling them the story.
Got it. And so for the people that are listening, and for example, they don't have an email list, but they do have an Instagram, they have a Facebook, they have a contact book. Um, Do you recommend that they start talking about them going into the journey of multifamily and posting updates?
So I would recommend two things. So one is yes, if you have some kind of following on social media, however small the following is, start posting regularly about what you're doing. And the other thing that's really important is to get them off social media and onto your email list. So, because the thing about social media is you're dependent on the social media platform. Like you don't own your audience. They can shut your profile down for any reason or for no reason at all. The way the algorithms work, they might not even show what you're posting to your own contacts, right? So, and then your contacts have to get on there and they have to see it, be looking for it. So you want to get them off social media and onto your email list. And the way that you do that is, with some people, it's very simple. You could just say, hey, I started an email list. Do you want to get on my email list? Here's how you join, right? And that's easy. But for people who don't know you as well, you need to give them something of value in order to get them onto your email list. So you have to create what's called a lead magnet. And I'm sure you guys, guys are probably all familiar with this already. You see an ad or you see something, they're like, hey, get this ebook, right? Or here's some information that you want to learn something more about this. I've done a free book or a checklist or a download. And to get it, you always have to put your email address in, right? So that's a way of giving somebody something of value in return for them joining your email list. And it's really important that you have something like that, that to entice people to get off the social media and onto your list. And then if you're out there networking in person, then it's easy. You're collecting business cards and then you just add people to your CRM so that they're on the list, right? So
Hmm.
that's how you do it.
So yeah, so start telling the people you know about what you're doing.
Absolutely.
What is the next step for you?
Well, the next step, so after starting to email the list, is going out there looking for a deal or looking for a friend who has a deal that I can partner with and raise money, for their deal. But you really, it's, obviously making money. I mean, this is really a simple, maybe overly simplistic thing, but like one half of the equation is you got to have customers at your list. The other half of the question is you got to have a product to sell to them, right? So you got to be offering a product to your customers. If you don't have both, you don't make any money, right? So in real estate, the customers are your investor list and potential investors that are out there that you haven't met yet, and the product is real estate deal that you're going to sell to them. So, and when I say sell to them, I don't mean like as a broker. I mean, you're going to sell an investment opportunity to them, a piece of the deal essentially. So you have to have those two things. Otherwise, you're not going to make any money. So the next step is go go find a deal.
Got it. So go find a deal. Um, can you give us a little bit of a step-by-step process on where you would start looking? What kind of criteria you would look for?
Well, so it really depends on what you're looking for, right? So um, if I were looking for like a small multifamily, let's say, I would probably start out in someplace like Crexy or LoopNet, right? And um, now both of those get a bad rap, I think, oftentimes because people say it's where you know deals go to die, what have you, right?
Yeah.
What I've just and I used to believe that too, but what I've discovered is that for small deals, for hotel deals, and for deals in small markets, what you often find is that the brokers in those markets don't really know what to do other than to put things on Crexy or LoopNet. They don't have a big investor list. It's not like working with like the big commercial brokerages where they can blast these things out to like thousands of highly qualified investors. A lot of these smaller brokers really don't know what else to do. So if they have an email list, and a lot of them don't even have a list, they'll email their list and then they just stick it on Crexy or LoopNet. So there are some good deals to find in smaller markets,
Mhm.
on Crexy or LoopNet. If you're going for a big deal, like if you were in the position where you could go after a 100, 200 unit deal, then the way that you're going to do it is, you've got to make relationships with brokers, and because brokers are the ones who control those deals. And, like in my position, well, I already have the relationships with brokers, so it wouldn't be an issue for me to just start picking up the phone and calling people and saying, hey, I'm looking for for a deal because I've got credibility. But if you're just starting out and you haven't done that before, well, first of all, if you've never done a deal before and you haven't closed anything and you're not partnered with people who have closed deals, it's very difficult to get any traction with brokers on the big deals because they're just going to assume you can't close and they don't want to waste their time. So you have to figure out a way to overcome that, right? And the way that you overcome that is you have to do some preparation ahead of time. You've got to, you know, put up a website or something. People are going to look you up, right? So you got to have something for them to find. If they can't find anything, they're going to be like, who is this guy? You've got to get, people overlook this, but like, if you email some big commercial broker at a big real estate firm with like your name at Gmail, they're not even going to respond, right? You've got to have a branded email address.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why people don't get these, because it costs you like $20 to get a branded email, but
Yeah.
people are too cheap. I'm like, if you can't spend $20, you don't deserve to be in the business, right? So you got to register a domain, get a branded email address and email from that and have a website. That's sort of like the price of entry. And we're talking about, you can do all that for under $500. So you got to have someplace for people to land to find you, right? And then you need to figure out a way to get introductions to brokers because still cold calling them is hard. It's very unlikely that they're going to respond to you if you cold email them.
Mm-hmm.
So it really helps a lot if you can find some way to get an introduction. And there's lots of ways you can do that. One is get on LinkedIn and see if you know anybody who knows them, right? That's very helpful. Another thing is what I always recommend, like for my coaching students, is if you're looking at a particular market, you should be like investigating that market and really doing research. One of the first people that you should be talking to is a property manager, right? And
Mm-hmm.
property managers are fairly easy to approach because they're always looking for a new business.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not really in the habit of like turning you away if you show up and say, hey, I'd like to meet with you because I'm in your market and I'm looking for deals. Once you meet a property manager, the managers know all the brokers in town because they're working with them constantly. Because
Mm-hmm.
when deals are getting bought and sold, the brokers and the managers are constantly working on getting information, getting access to the property, all this sort of stuff. So they know all the brokers. And if you say to a property manager, hey, would you introduce me to some of the brokers you know in town? When the brokers get that introduction from that property manager, they're going to take your call, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like coming in cold. It's a totally different experience. And then here's the real thing. If you're like, this is the real like pro tip. If you're looking at a market that's like where you're not from, if you're looking in your, in your backyard, it's different. But let's just say, I'm in New York. I used to do deals in South Carolina. If I called up a broker and I got an introduction from somebody and I said, hey, I'm flying down from New York. I'm going to be in town for 2 days. Can I meet you while I'm there? They almost always say yes, because they see that you're making an effort, but you've also made yourself scarce. 2 days, there's a deadline. Like, I'm only there for 2 days. I'm flying all the way down. If you want to meet me, that's your only chance. Like, you don't say that to them, but that's the implication.
Mm-hmm.
That's very powerful. So, 9 times out of 10, they're going to meet you under those circumstances. So personal introductions and make some kind of effort really goes a long way.
That's amazing. So that's how you get connected to the brokers. And then for the smaller deals, you can go into LoopNet and Crexy and find a deal there.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the thing is I found that's amazing on Crexy too, is that, Crexy, if you get a pro account, which is not very expensive, and maybe even if you have a free account too,
yeah.
oftentimes if you click on a deal
Mhm.
and you've got all your information registered there, brokers start calling you. Like if they're having trouble selling that deal, I'm getting like people calling my phone here. Oh, I saw you clicked on this deal, right? And usually it's just something I was curious about. I'm not really interested in it, but it's a really great opportunity to call the broker back and say, hey, I'm not interested in that deal, but here's what I am interested in. And as soon as you start engaging them, then you've started a relationship. And now you're not just some tire kicker. If you start talking to them intelligently about, this is the kind of deal I'm looking for, this is where I'm looking for, this is the range, prices, doors, whatever, now you've got a relationship with them. And they're going to start showing you stuff. And then the critical thing there is, if they show you something and you don't like it, respond to them and tell them why you don't like it. They're not going to, their feelings are not going to be hurt. They don't care that you don't like it, but it shows that you're a professional if you call them back and say, hey, yeah, thanks for showing me that deal. This is why it doesn't work for me. It just it just increases their trust in you when you do that, increases your credibility with them.
Hmm.
And it also helps you get closer to what you're actually looking for, because it's helpful information for them to know exactly what you're looking for. So they're not showing you everything. They're just showing you those one or two deals that come up that really hit your criteria.
That makes sense. So once you've established some connections, or maybe you found a deal, and you are finding a deal, um, can you give us some ways of knowing if it's a good deal?
Well, you gotta learn how to underwrite deals first of all,
Hmm.
right? That's like the critical thing. So um, with commercial property, you're not looking at comps. You're not, it doesn't really matter to you. It's not like it's irrelevant, but it doesn't matter to you so much like what the property next door sold for as what the cash flow is on the property now and what you think you can turn it into, right? So um, and that is kind of a longer conversation about how you underwrite deals, but you have to you have to do sort of two things. So one is you have to look at what the expenses of the property are right now,
Hmm.
right? You have to look at what the rents are right now. And then you have to understand, especially on the expense side, which of your expenses are going to be the same and which are going to be different. Now, a lot of times you'll hear people say you have to underwrite your deals on the actual expenses, right? But that's not entirely true, because that's you can get misled by that. And I did when I started out. I said, "Oh yeah, they tell me I'm supposed to underwrite on actuals, so that's what I'll do." So I just assumed that I was going to have the same expense structure as the seller, right? So I thought I was going to pay the same for property management, for labor, for insurance, for taxes. Fact of the matter is, my cost structure was totally different than his. And usually the things that get you are insurance. Your insurance will always be more expensive than the seller. Your property taxes will always be more expensive than the seller, at least after the second year.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, if you're dealing with a seller who's, say, managing themselves, they may not have any employees, they may not be paying any management fees. So you have to bake that into your offer as well. And so that's what so when they say actual expenses, it really means your actual expenses. And the things that you can usually take as kind of given are like, what they're spending for, services like lawn care, garbage collection, things like that. You could pest control, you can keep those contracts in place. If you keep the employees on, they'll pay the employees the same thing. Marketing, usually that's going to be similar. Your repairs and sort of repairs and maintenance will often be kind of about the same. But a lot of other expenses will change. So you really have, sometimes you look at a deal and you're like, wow, this is a killer deal. But when you start adding in your own expenses to it, you're like, wow, this is a terrible deal.
Hmm.
So you really have to understand um, what it's going to cost you to run the property.
Got it. So in terms of property taxes, I'm aware that some states are value the new price of the property taxes differently. Where can
Yeah.
people find how to value the property taxes?
So yeah, it varies from state to state and sometimes like from county to county, right? So what you the first thing you should do when you're looking at a property is try to find the property taxes right now, right?
Hmm.
So you can usually go, sometimes it takes some digging, but it's either going to be in the town or the county where the property taxes, where you can find the property tax information, right? And sometimes it's easy. I mean, like in the offerings memorandum, they just give you the tax ID number, and then it's really easy to find. Sometimes, there are different systems, but sometimes you got to enter the address. Sometimes it can take a little digging, but eventually you'll find it. And if worse comes to worse, you just pick up the phone and call the county and say, "Hey, where do I find this?" And they'll tell you.
Hmm.
Um, so you want to find the old tax bills to try to get an idea of how they're assessing taxes. Now, some places are very clear how they do it. So like in South Carolina, it's very clear. It's like 70, what was it, 75% of the assessed value times 6% times the mill rate, and you can kind of calculate it. And sometimes, the mill rate may change a little from year to year, but basically it's all the same, right? And you can calculate that really easily. Some places like here in New York, it's really vague and you don't really know what you're getting into. If you do sort of a basic calculation, you're like, this is crazy, but then you talk to the assessor and it's sort of like, you're the assessed value will be like a tiny fraction of the property price, right? So that the taxes are not overwhelming. But you can't get a straight answer on the phone from like, well, tell me the calculation, what's the formula? And they'll say, oh, it's this percentage of assessed value. How do you get to assessed value? Oh, it's the assessed value. Like you can't get a straight answer out of them. But and I think in Texas, it's like it's 3% of the sales price, right? Whatever the sales price is, it's 3%. So it really depends on the jurisdiction. And that's a really important thing to dig into. But I always start that process by getting my hands on the old tax bills and then trying to use them to figure out like what my taxes will be, um, based on my sales price. And you'll see oftentimes they have the assessment in there. Sometimes they'll have like the purchase price. So you can kind of go back to the previous purchase price and see how they calculated the taxes and how it's gone up. And it's not the cleanest and easiest thing in the world, but you can at least get a decent guess for taxes that way. And as I said, especially if you're in, I mean, most places, if you call the assessor, other than tax assessment season, the assessor's sitting around with nothing to do. So they're happy to get, I mean, sometimes they'll talk your ear off if you let them,
Yeah.
because they're just happy to have an interruption. But I find them usually pretty helpful. At least they'll talk with you. So
Yeah. That's awesome. And so when it comes to insurance, is there a similar process for that?
So insurance is a really sticky one because at least for multifamily properties, I mean, in when I was looking at smaller properties back in the day, sort of like residential or like triplexes and stuff, I could call up a broker and they'd say, yeah, this is what a policy costs. It's a lot more complicated with like a large multifamily property because then you start looking at, I mean, they just look at everything like where is it located? How far is it from the fire station? Does it have a pool? How many rooms? Like how many fire extinguishers? I mean, they dig into like everything. How old is it? Is it sprinklered? Is it not sprinklered? Like, and it takes them a while to come up with a quote. So I've often had the case where, I go to my broker and he's like, gives me some kind of ridiculous quote. And I'm like, dude, you just broke my deal. I
Yeah.
can't pay that. And then as we get deeper into the process, the quote comes back at like half of what he originally said. And it'll be somewhere around, where we thought it was going to be. But insurance, as you know, has just gone up tremendously recently, right? And especially in Florida and Texas and California. Some other states, not quite as much, but those states have been hit really hard with insurance premiums. And, people used to underwrite insurance at like, just as a plug number, 500 a door. And now it's like, it can be 1,500 a door, right? So, it's hard to get a handle on. I think probably the best way to do that is just go and talk to other investors and find out what they're paying and try to get like a general number. And you can talk with brokers about this too, because they're seeing a lot of deals.
Mhm.
But you know, the more people you talk to, the better for insurance.
Got it. And management, we already talked about talking to a property manager who could present you to brokers. Do you go to the same management and ask them, what would you manage this property for?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a really important point. Like, I like to run my underwriting by two people. So one is my mortgage broker because they see a ton of deals and they have a really good handle on costs. I mean, stuff like insurance too. Like they'll have a good sort of plug number for what they're seeing insurance coming in at. But run it by your mortgage broker. They're always happy to help, and they'll kind of tell you if you're on track or not. And then the property manager is obviously the other person you need to run it by and say, look, is this underwriting consistent with what you're seeing on the properties that you manage? Can you manage at these numbers? If not, what are the numbers that you can manage at? So those are very helpful, to have. Occasionally, I have some property managers that I'll reach out to them and they'll say, oh yeah, well, look at, this is the operating statement from a deal that we're managing right now that's very similar to that property you're looking at. And so you can look at the expenses and kind of get an idea
Hmm.
of what it costs to run the deal.
Got it. So you want to talk to a property manager and
Mortgage broker.
a mortgage broker. Got it. All right.
I mean,
So
at least one of them. I mean, if both is better, but at least one.
Got it. So we found out what the taxes, insurance, and management, and that means that we're able to underwrite at our prices, not what the
Yep.
seller prices are. And so now that we know a bit of the expenses, we can find out if there's a deal or not. What's common to value add?
I mean, in terms of expenses for a value add, like how much it's going to cost you, or
In
what do you
terms of
mean?
like, okay, well, I found this deal. What's a good indication that this deal under new management, our management, would make more money?
Okay, so there's a couple of things, right? There's kind of think about it really broadly, like sort of two kinds of value add, right?
Hmm.
There is there's the home run case, which is like just the management value add where you don't have to do anything. You
Yeah,
just have to raise the rents. That's like the home run, but it doesn't happen that much. But it does happen sometimes. And then there's the value add where you actually have to go and spend money to like redo apartments and that sort of thing.
yeah.
The way that you decide um, whether this is a value add opportunity or not is you have to look at rent comps, right? So you have to see what other properties in the market are renting for. Now, if you have a property manager in the market that you're working with, they can tell you,
Hmm.
right? Because the property managers should all be talking to each other and collecting data, and they'll tell you what things are renting for. So they'll be able to say, hey, look, even in the current condition, this is $100 below market. You could easily raise the rent, or if you fix it up, it's going to be $300 more a month, right? So that's how you figure it. You can also just get on like apartments.com and sort of see what's out there, what things are renting for. But again, like the more information you can collect, the better, to get a handle on what things are actually renting for. You can also shop the competitors, right? So you call them up and you say, I'm looking to rent an apartment. What does it cost for, one bedroom or whatever? And you can collect information yourself that way too. But once you see that there's a delta there, then you have a value add opportunity on your hands. Like I said, sometimes it might be just that you just need to raise the rents, but it might be that you have to fix the apartments up, and then it's a calculation of, well, how much is it going to cost me to fix up the apartment versus how much rent am I going to get? And usually the rule of thumb on that is you want to get a 20% return on your investment. So if it's going to cost you, if you're going to get $2,000 a year extra rent for upgrading, then you can spend $10,000 upgrading the apartment, and you hope that 10,000 is going to be enough to get that extra rent, right? So that's kind of how you make the calculation.
So can you repeat that last
Yeah,
calculation?
yeah. So you like I said, you want to make a 20% return on your upgrade, right? So if it's going to cost, maybe it's a little easier this way. If it's going to cost you $10,000 to renovate the apartment, you want to make sure that you're collecting an additional $2,000 a year in rent, right?
Yeah.
So to pay you back 20% for that value add that you're doing, right? So I mean, most likely in this market, it's going to cost you more, but the rent bump may be higher. So if you're looking at it, you're saying, well, look, I'm only going to get $100, $1,000 a year in increased rent for a $10,000 investment. Well, maybe that's not worth it, So that's kind of how you look at it.
Got it. So if I spend $10,000 upgrading a unit and I can command 200 bucks more, then that's okay.
Yeah, then you do it.
Now, if I am able to only command 100 bucks, then what happens?
Well, you got to make a decision as to whether it's worth it or not, right?
Mhm.
It still may be worth it. I mean, you may underwrite the deal and you may say like, hey, we're going to get this much rent growth over time, and over a 5-year hold, it's going to translate into X return. It's worth it. Then it becomes just more of like a personal, you know, decision as to whether the risk is worth the return or not. Are you getting enough return for the work? That sort of thing.
Got it. And I guess talking about returns, what kind of returns do investors want?
So generally speaking, they're they're really looking to be sort of high teens annualized returns to
Hmm.
low 20s.
Hmm.
So once you start getting up towards 20% annualized returns, it gets pretty easy to get people interested in your deal. Um, but it also really depends on what it is. I mean, and who the investor is and what their objective is. If you if you're looking at, like, I don't know, downtown Miami, right, or downtown Los Angeles or downtown New York City, they may be willing to take 7 or 8% annualized return because they see it as being really safe, right? Whereas if it's run of the mill garden style, value add deal, excuse me, I'm sorry. Um, they're going to want, a higher return for that because they perceive it as riskier. So it really depends on what the deal is. Super luxury, class A, market, downtown core property is going to require less of a return. It also depends on who your investor is. If your investor is someone who wants to make money, like they're expecting to make a lot of money, then obviously they're going to want a higher return. If it's somebody who's looking to protect what they've got, right? So they're not looking to make money so much as to preserve their capital and put it into something safe, then they're going to want a safer investment. They're going to have a lower return expectation. So it really depends on who your investor is and what kinds of deals you're doing. That's going to determine how much you need to promise them to get them interested.
Got it. So we've talked about how to, be credible, right? How to talk to brokers, how to talk to property managers and get brokers introductions, how to talk to, how to get in, how to look for deals in platforms like Craigslist and LoopNet, and then how to underwrite the deal with our expenses, not the seller's expenses.
Right.
And what some value adds are in terms of management and spending money for rent increases. So at this point, once I figure out that the property is a potential value add, there's a negotiation phase, right?
Yeah.
What negotiation tips can you give us?
You're talking about negotiating with the seller.
Yeah, or the broker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so negotiating with the seller essentially, right? So, I mean, look, it depends on where you are in the market cycle. If you're in a buyer's market, they're going to have a price that they have in mind that you're going to have to hit, but they're not going to tell you what it is. So you may ask the broker, like, hey, what's the whisper price on this? And then you've got to decide whether that's something you are comfortable hitting or not. If it's a more of a buyer's market, then they'll usually kind of tell you outright what the asking price is because they're trying to anchor you to a higher price, and they know that you're not going to come in at that price. So you're going to want to come in at, you kind of, I mean, I hate doing this, but there's kind of no choice really, right? You've got to make a lowball or lowballish offer to try to, because you're going to meet in the middle somewhere, right? So, unfortunately, that's kind of the way that it works most of the time.
Yeah.
And there isn't really a way around it because you don't really get to deal with, most of the time you're dealing with a broker and you don't get to talk with the seller, right? So you don't really have an opportunity to find out what other things might motivate them. But one thing that's happening right now is the financing environment is difficult, right? And this is probably particularly the case in like single family homes and smaller homes, or I'm experiencing this with hotels. But there really is an opportunity to use seller financing. And the thing about seller financing that's very advantageous is that you can say to the seller, hey, look, all these other people who are going to banks and they're getting mortgages at 7% or whatever, they can't pay your price. That's why your property is sitting on the market. I'll pay your price if you give me seller financing at X interest rate, right? And then you can tell them like, hey, look, and show them on a spreadsheet or something like, if you give me seller financing, not only do you get your price, but you're going to get all this interest over 5 years, and the real value to you is, it's not $100,000 now; it's $125,000 that you're going to get. And for a lot of people, that's pretty compelling. And if they have no mortgage on the property, they don't need your your payment to pay back the bank or whatever, that can be a really, enticing possibility for them, um, as opposed to getting a bunch of offers for less than what they really want for the property. So that's something to keep in mind right now. But that's really only when you're able to kind of talk directly with, with the seller.
Got it. So seller financing and being able to talk to the seller in this current time um, is good option.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you ever see deals being done as a subject to?
Not in the multifamily space. Not, because you're usually what you're dealing with in that situation is a loan with, a serious amount of covenants, and the covenants include, like, so, uh, the seller can't transfer the loan to somebody else, right? However, you can do loan assumptions, which is different from a subject to,
Yeah.
right? Because, so sometimes you'll see that loans are assumable, and, so you can assume the mortgage, but you in that case, you get underwritten by the bank. So if you don't qualify for the loan, they won't let they won't let you assume it, right? So you still have to qualify for the loan. So it's not as easy to do as like a sub two, where you're kind of doing it on the down low a little bit with with respect to the bank and just keeping the payments up so they don't care. Like there's a lot more scrutiny of commercial loans, so you can't really do a sub two, but you can do an assumption.
Got it. And I've heard of this maybe potentially being something that works. And that is, for example, let's say you're trying to get a loan from the bank, and then you need still a 20% down payment,
Mhm.
and you ask the seller to carry back that 20%. Do you see that being done in the multifamily space?
Um, I've heard of it happening, but it's not very common because usually the lender wants you to have skin in the game.
Hmm.
I think the way that you would do that though in the multifamily space is if you bring the seller into your partnership and they become a big equity partner essentially, right?
Mm.
Then potentially you could do it.
Hmm.
But the bank is still going to do all of its underwriting of you and then the seller and everybody else. So it's not as easy to do as it is with smaller deals. It's pretty rare because most of the sellers just want to get out, and they need to this like I said, the lenders want you to have substantial skin in the game yourself. So you've got to come up with the money, and usually not in the form of like a seller carryback.
Got it. So in terms of like, we were talking about negotiation, and you said like the name of the game is just basically getting what the asking price is and then doing a lowball offer just to get into the negotiation and then ending up somewhere in the middle. Um, how low, or like, is there like a certain metric like that you would do of like how low you would go without really like going lower than that?
Well, I mean, that's also only in a buyer's market, right? In a seller's market, if you're not coming in at least asking, they're not even going to show your offer to the seller in most cases. So in a buyer's market, you can go a little more lowball. I mean, again, that's there's no rule to that, right? It's kind of like how low do you feel comfortable going? What chance are you willing to take of annoying the seller so they don't want to deal with you? There are people out there whose strategy is just to go and make a lot of ridiculously lowball offers, and they just assume that 99 times out of 100 the seller's going to tell them to pound sand, but that one time they get the deal. That's some people's strategy. I think more people take the approach of trying to figure out sort of where they can come in without giving away too much, but without annoying the seller so much that the seller tells them to get lost. So there's no kind of rule about it, right?
Got it. What do you think people think about that person who comes in and lowballs everybody?
I guess I don't think you get a reputation in the market for sure. So you really can't do that with big multifamily deals because there's a very small number of brokers who are doing these deals. And if you do it like two or three times in a market, I mean, you'll get a reputation and they won't deal with you anymore. It's not like single family where in any market, there are dozens or hundreds of agents and you probably never encounter the same one twice. In any, even in a pretty decent sized multifamily market, there's a pretty small number of brokers. So word gets around pretty fast.
Got it. So I guess we talked about how to find a deal. One thing we didn't really talk about was the deal size. So, what is a small deal size, and what are some challenges and pros, and what are some, bigger deal sizes or medium deal sizes, and what are the pros and challenges of that?
Well, starting off with the big side, the big deals, if you're looking at anything that's sort of 100 units or more, right? I mean, for most multifamily at this point, this is really a generalization, but I mean, you're talking anywhere in most markets between $100,000 and $200,000 a door,
Hmm.
right? For multifamily. Um, a lot of people want to be over 100 units, preferably over 125 units, because it's much more efficient to run at that size, like in terms of staffing and things like that. But then you're talking, so what? I mean, 125 units at a minimum of 100,000 a door, that's a $12.5 million deal, right? So that's a lot of money to come up with, right?
Hmm.
And financing that deal, I mean, there's challenges with that. So smaller deals are obviously easier to get into, right? But then you run into challenges with management because you lack um, scale, like economies of scale. So you've got to be able to find a property manager that can run a smaller deal for you and run it efficiently, and you have to bake that into your price and hopefully get an accepted offer on that basis. The thing that people really ought to know about commercial property, and commercial meaning anything that's 5 units or more, is that the your ability to get a loan is going to be dependent on two things. One is the income produced by the property, and the second is the net worth and liquidity of the buyer, of the borrower, right? So even in a situation where you're getting a loan that's non-recourse, so like if you're getting a Fannie or Freddie loan that's non-recourse, they can only go against the property. They still insist that your net worth be equal or greater than the size of the loan, right? So I learned this the hard way when I started on my first deal. At that time, I had investors who said, we'll invest $1 million with you. And I was like, oh, that's great. I can go buy a $4 million deal with $1 million. I went to the banks, and the banks were like, do you have a $3 million net worth? And I was like, why do I need one? Right. And so I had to go find people to co-sign on the debt with me who had a higher net worth. Right. When you're dealing with single family houses, they don't care what they maybe look at your income and stuff, but your net worth is not an issue. So that's a constraint on your ability to do deals, which is why I usually recommend that people start off with smaller deals, like figure out what your net worth is and then go find deals that fit. And then obviously every time you do a deal, you're building your net worth, and the next one can be a little bit bigger. Also, it's a lot easier to come up with a down payment for, if your down payment is 100,000 rather than, 10 million, it's a lot easier to come up with that money. So um, I say start. My advice is always sort of start where you are and try to grow from there. I know other people will give other advice. They'll say go as big as you can, partner with a whole bunch of people and do really big deals. I don't know. I think it just depends on the economics to you and what you're comfortable with, and I think it's the most important thing is getting started. It's not getting started with a certain deal size or a certain kind of deal. It's really start where you are and build from there.
Got it. Sounds awesome. All right. So start where you are and then go from there. So I have a couple of deals that I'm working on. We have a couple of minutes, so let's see if we can talk about these deals and find
Sure.
a way.
I do need to let you know that I'm recording my own podcast in a couple minutes, so I need
How
to
many
get
minutes
off.
do you have?
I till about 12, maybe 7 minutes I can do.
Got it. Okay, cool. All right. So I'm currently talking to two owners. The first owner is in Georgia in a neighborhood called Macon. It's a 13 unit property, and currently it's making in gross rents about $85,000 to $90,000 as of last year. He says that expenses are running him, somewhere in the $40,000 range, so he's netting about 50. Um, so he's asking. what he really cares about is he wants cash flow. He's 74 years old and he wants to retire and he wants to use the cash flow from a sale or from the property to continue, living. Um, and so I've come up with, I told him, is that seller financing something that he would do? And he said yes. And he said he wouldn't require anything down. So
Wow.
um, what I am struggling with is that he wants too much cash flow. So what I've told him over the phone yesterday was, um, you know, rents are right now at 600. The market rents are at 1100. And so what I've told him is, if I were to buy the property, I would, for the first 1 or 2 years, give you a smaller uh, payment of debt service. After I rehab the units and I command a higher rent, then I would be able to pay you out more for the remaining of the loan period. And so what I've underwritten is, I want to give him, he bought the property in 2006 for like 376. He wants, close to 1 million, but I don't think he's going to get, I'm not going to offer that. So I'm thinking of offering him, I'll make you a payment of $2,500 a month for the first 2 years. And then after that, for the next 10 years, I'll make you a payment of $37 or $4,000. This amounts to like 500 and 550. And the one thing that I am going to talk to him about is 0% interest. And so this is kind of like the way I'm structuring the offer that I was gonna go on today after this call at some point. So could you give me any
Well, I mean, it's a pretty unusual structure, at least in my experience, where and maybe other people are doing things the way that you're discussing it. I haven't seen it that way. Usually you're just giving them a simple interest rate, right? We're just saying, hey, kind of like a bank, give me a loan for 80% of the, of the property, of the sale price, and I'm going to pay you X% on that with a balloon at the end. So I haven't seen like a structure like what you're talking about, where it's a sort of a guaranteed payment of a certain amount. I mean, let me ask you this: is it so? This money that you're paying him, the 2,500 and then the 3,700, is that going to pay down your principal on
is
the
going straight to principal?
going straight to principal? I mean, gosh, if he agrees to it, I'd say absolutely do it. Like I I'd be a little surprised if he does, but if he's going to agree to that, like, I mean, that sounds like a great deal for you, right? So, I mean, am I correct? And did I hear you right when you said this is producing? What did you say? 90,000 a month,
No, no, no,
or
90,000 a year.
90,000 a year, and you're at roughly a 50% expense ratio, right? So you're clearing 45
Yeah.
a year. I mean, again, are you dialed in on what your expenses are, for the property with insurance and taxes and everything? Do you
So
feel comfortable with those numbers?
I haven't done the research on that. However, with the increase from the rent increases, the property is going to be producing around $170,000, and then after the 2 years, of the rehab time, the cash flow looks to be like around 70, to $90,000. So if he were to agree to this offer that I'm presenting, then I think that it would pay for it. And even if I was getting a little bit of cash flow, every month, but everything was going to principal, I'm still, going
Right.
up in net worth. So
I mean, if your objective is just simply to maintain not lose the property to the seller, right? Then it'll probably work out. But I would definitely want to drill down on those expenses first and make sure.
yeah,
And because you never know, like oftentimes sellers have had these properties for a long time, their taxes haven't been reassessed, and their insurance, a lot of people are underinsured and they don't realize it. And when you go to insure it, your insurance is going to go up a lot, depending on where it is. But it's going to go up a lot anyway. But it could go up a lot if this is in Florida or California or someplace, it may go up a lot more than you expect. So I would want to try to get some kind of handle on that, or at least use a plug number that's pretty high. Like, where is this property
It's in
that you're
Georgia.
looking? It's in Georgia.
It's
So
Macon.
yeah, oh, you mentioned that. So I would just use like $1,000 a door for insurance, just to, if
Mhm.
as a holding number. And if it's less, then great. But if not, you haven't overpaid, and see if the numbers still work. But listen, if he goes for it, I'd say great. Um, like I said, it's kind of unusual, but if it's all going to principal and you don't need to live off the cash flow, and this is just, and you've got no money down in the deal, I mean, it sounds like a good deal to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And he has a weird arrangement with his property management company,
yeah.
which is he gives them 20% of the revenue, and they take care of all property management plus they take care of repairs. They don't bill him for service. They bill him
Huh,
only for parts.
huh.
I don't know how to know if that's a good deal
I
or not.
mean, I don't know. I mean, that doesn't sound bad either. If they're not, I mean, if they're only billing through, and they're billing make at cost, if they're billing through the materials for the turns and stuff,
Only
that's
billing.
not bad. All the labor is included.
Hmm.
That's not terrible. Anyway, you underwrite it. I mean, just underwrite that into the deal. And if the numbers make sense for you, then they make sense. It kind of doesn't really matter what the expenses are, as long as you're making the profit that you want.
Hmm.
So, but that doesn't sound like a bad. And it's also nice because it's fixed. Like, what you're getting, right? It's not like your labor is going to be all over the place, because you know, this month there's lots of work, and next month there's no work, and it's bouncing around. 20% is just knowing what it is actually kind of nice.
Got it. Well, cool. I think this will be for it for today. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I really
You're
appreciate you.
welcome.
Where can we find you?
Well, a couple different places. If you would like to join my email list and get a free download I have about how to do syndications, go to apartmentinvestorsclub.com, and there's a free download right there. If you're interested in joining my investor list, please Google Two Bridges Asset Management LLC, and you can find the investor link there.
Got it. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. Thanks
And
for having me on.
I hope you have a good day. Okay. Hope you
Thanks.
have you back soon.
Absolutely. Take care of yourself. Thanks for having me on.
Okay.